Hello Year 9, welcome to lesson 2 on the Crucible. So this lesson is all going to be about a Puritan village. Just a reminder, some helpful tips on how to make sure you get your best out of this lesson. Here's a slide, I'll leave it up there, you can pause the video. Just to remind you though, the best things that you can do is to make sure that you're working in a quiet environment, you have all your equipment ready to hand, your English exercise book, pen, your pencil case, you've checked Teams before you start, check your instructions from your English teacher, and that you work hard the best you can. Okay, ready to learn? Off we go. So your title for today's lesson is A Puritan Village. If you want to just pause the video, make sure you've got a nice clean page in your exercise book and you write that down neatly and underline it. And there's a question then on the screen with what do you understand by the word Puritan? And there is an image on the screen as well of some Puritans. So you can just pause the video and have a think about that word, and you can do a brainstorm around it by just what the word conjures up to you, and there's some pictures to help you if you get stuck. What do you think the word makes you think? Okay, so what did you get? Well, the word comes from purity or purify, so to make something purer, and it belongs to a group of people, or it names a group of people called the Puritans, the Puritan people, and they were extreme Protestants, and you've probably come across that word before, and they wanted to purify the Church of England by basically stripping it back and making it much more simple and uncomplicated way of worship and way of life, way back to the early Christians. So they wanted to make the Church of England and Christianity much, much more simple. What did they believe? Well, first of all, they thought that the rituals, the ceremonies, the teachings that had been developed over the centuries by the Catholic Church went against what God originally intended. They had got way too complicated. They thought that the congregations could organise themselves, that you didn't need church leaders, that you didn't need all these big organisations, that the people in the community could just do things themselves. And they thought that Sunday was the special day, and this should be devoted to worship. So, you've got 8 statements on the screen. You don't need to write these down, they're just something you can look at. I want you to decide whether or not, if you were a Puritan, do you think these would be true or false in your life? So I want you to pause the video and I want you to decide whether or not they are true or false. Okay, so number 1, you were punished for drinking, swearing and gambling. Number 2, Christmas Day was seen as a fast day. You were not allowed to eat. What was your Christmas Day like? Everyone was responsible for everyone else's sins. You were criticised for having long hair. I'd be in trouble. It was forbidden to celebrate Easter, so no Easter eggs. True or false? A man was not allowed to kiss his wife in public. True or false? You were not allowed to buy or sell on the Sabbath. And dancing was forbidden. Does it depend on how good a dancer you are? Okay, so if you were a Puritan, true or false, which ones are true or which ones are false? Well, I can tell you that they were all true. Not all of those are Puritan rules. So think about then, if you were a young person, if you were living in a Puritan village, which is when the Crucible is set, what would life have been like for young people living at this time, following those rules? Pretty harsh, eh? Absolutely. Okay, so we're going to move on and look at some characters in the Crucible. We're going to look at the opening of the play, and it's really important when we first look at the opening of the play that you understand who Tituba is. And this builds on some things that you've looked at in Of Mice and Men, and the context of Mice and Men and the racial tensions that we had in Of Mice and Men. And here we've got a picture of Tituba from a screen adaptation of the play, And it's set in 1692. First of all, you've got to understand that it's much older than Of Mice and Men, at least 300 years, well, nearly 300 years older than Of Mice and Men. She's a Negro slave in the village. She was bought from Barbados by one of the people in the village. So I want you to think, if we talked about those Puritans, how might they behave towards her? Okay, so we're just going to look at her first of all. So, Tituba. Tituba is Reverend Paris's slave. She's a woman from Barbados, and she practices what the Puritans would view as black magic. She only does this because Abigail Williams, the protagonist, the main character, manipulates her into doing so. So bold and manipulates, because that means that she forces her, coerces her, tricks her, emotionally blackmails her into doing it. Though Tituba admits her supposed sin, she's not given a pardon like the others who confess. She's condemned to death for doing black magic. And although there's nothing in the play that directly comments on it, racism undoubtedly plays a large part in her fate. And the fact that she was convicted at all for her practices is prejudice. Before being brought to Massachusetts, where the play is set, Tituba never saw her singing, dancing and spell casting as evil. Her practices, her things that she did, her singing, her dancing, her casting spells, were spiritual, and they descended from her African roots. They were part of her culture. So it's quite ironic that the Puritans, the people who live in the village in Salem in Massachusetts, they came to America to escape religious persecution. And they would practice, therefore, this deliberate, cruel and ignorant persecution on Tituba for practicing her own religious culture. So she's persecuted for doing things that they came to America to escape persecution from. So we've still got a text that we can see some racial prejudice from Tituba. And in the first scene that we look at, we can see a character who treats Tituba differently from other characters. Okay, so I just want you to keep that in mind about who Tituba is, and that she is a bought slave by Reverend Paris. Okay, so your next title I want you to write in your book is Why Do Writers Use Stage Directions? So if you just want to pause the video and write the title and underline it in your exercise book. Okay, now I want you to think, why do writers use stage directions? So have a think. Can you come up with any ideas? Well, first of all, you may have got some of these, and if you haven't, you can write these down underneath your list. So they will give a director who's telling the actors what to do, or an actor, some clear information about how the playwright, the person who wrote the play, pictured the scene on the stage. This is what I want it to look like. They will tell the director and the actor how they want them to play the part. So I want you to do it this way, or I want you to do it this way. They will also give a clue about how they want the audience to be focused on ideas in the script. I want you to make the audience feel this way, or I want you to sort of steer the audience this way. Okay, so it's all about getting the playwright's ideas across to the actors or the audience through the words in the script. So just jot those ideas down in your exercise book if you haven't already got them. And if you're not sure what stage directions look like, you can see here we've got an example of a script, and next to the word Katie in brackets we've got the word amused. So that is how she would say the words. So that's giving a clue to the actor or the actress who is playing the part of Katie. And then underneath we've got some direction as to how she would move on the stage. And then we've got some more bits there in square brackets where someone would enter, the noises that would appear on the stage. Okay, now we're going to look at the opening of the Crucible. And we're going to look at Reverend Paris, who I've already mentioned, and we're going to look at how the setting, the opening of the scene, is portrayed. We've looked at setting in the opening of Of Mice and Men and how a writer did it in a book, and now we're going to look at it in a play. So I want you to write the question down. What do we learn about the setting and Reverend Paris, double R, in the opening stage directions through language choices? So just pause the video and write that question down. Okay, and here you can see the opening stage directions. They're quite long, and none of this is a script. This is all just information from the playwright to the actors and the director on how he wants the stage to be set. So we're going to read this. I'm going to ask you to try and look for some language choices. Okay, so Act 1. A small upper bedroom in the home of Reverend Samuel Paris, Salem, Massachusetts, in the spring of the year 1692. There is a narrow window at the left. Through its leaded panes the morning sunlight streams. A candle still burns near the bed, which is at the right. A chest, a chair, and a small table are the other furnishings. At the back, a door opens onto the landing of the stairway to the ground floor. The room gives off an air of clean spareness. The roof rafters are exposed, and the wood colours are raw and unmellowed. As the curtain rises, Reverend Paris is discovered kneeling beside the bed, evidently in prayer. His daughter, Betty Paris, aged 10, is lying on the bed, inert. And inert means not moving at all, very still, without movement, almost coma-like. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to try and see if you can spot any key words in those stage directions that give you a clue about the setting, the room that they are in, and anything that tells you something about Reverend Paris. So just pause the video if you need to and reread that stage direction, and in your book see if you can jot down, and we'll do some quote explosions around them, any keywords, and I will go through these and jot down some that I've spotted as well. Okay, so what did we spot? Well, don't worry if you got different ones to me, but there are some I want you particularly to focus on. So first of all, in the room, the bedroom has an adjective that describes it as small, and the windows in the room are narrow. May remind you about a description of somewhere in Of Mice and Men. Okay. We've also got that the table, the furniture is quite small, so repetition of that adjective as well. So it's not only a small bedroom, but we've got small furniture in there. We have a adverb, get it right, Sunderland, adverb of how the candle burns, which is still. A candle still burns. So what's to think about that? And then moving on to Reverend Paris, towards the bottom of the extract, he's evidently in prayer. Ends in an ly, gives you a clue as to what sort of word it is. It's an adverb. He's evidently in prayer. He's not praying, he's evidently. I'm going to have a think about that word. Okay, so what I want you to think about, this is your task. I want you to think about small and narrow together. They're both adjectives. They suggest the room is very confining and limited. And we're going to try and combine that with Reverend Paris. So if the room is very small and very limiting, what might this tell us about Reverend Paris? You can pause the video and do this question one at a time, or you can wait until I go through all 4 questions, and there are going to be 4 questions around each corner of the slide, okay? And you can do all 4 at the end. It's entirely up to you how you want to do this task, but you are going to have these words in quote explosions, because I'm going to give you a question to look at to do with all these words. All right, so I want you to think about small and narrow. It suggests something is very small, confined, limited. The bedroom is very close and compact. If you put that with Reverend Paris and you turn that into a person, what might that tell you about Reverend Paris? Okay. Then we have the adjective small is repeated when it's looking at the table. So look, it's here. Okay, so we're on this small here. So again, if it's small, there's no escape. Small table, it's not very comfortable. It's not very luxurious. So what kind of person do we see Reverend Paris as if this is where he lives? Little comfort, little luxury. This is his house. So what kind of person is he? Okay. The next question. We have an adverb, still. The candle, therefore, it still burns. It's been burning a long time. Reverend Paris has been kneeling next to the bed of his daughter, who's been laying on the bed, still, inert, motionless. Are we changing our opinion of him? Does this make us think of something different about him? Still burns. He's kneeling next to the daughter of his bed. This candle is still there. Do we think something different about him with that? Pause the video if you need to answer that question now. I'm going to move on to the next one. Okay, the fourth and final section then. Evidently, another adverb. If he's evidently in prayer, that word suggests that he might not actually be praying. He's evidently, it looks like he's praying, but he might not be. Oh, okay. So, is this a final twist? Is this maybe suggesting something different? What final twist does this have on our impression of Paris? So I want you to pause the video here, and I want you to look at all those 4 questions, and I want you to make sure that you've got some ideas down as to what those words, those adjectives and adverbs make us think about Reverend Paris and the room in the opening of the Crucible. Pause the video and make sure you've got as many ideas down as you can. Okay, so we have a second set of stage directions on Reverend Paris where Tituba enters the room. So we'll read this next section, and there's just a couple more things I want us to look at. So Reverend Paris is praying now, and though we cannot hear his words, a sense of his confusion hangs about him. He mumbles, then seems about to weep. Then he weeps, then prays again, but his daughter does not stir on the bed. The door opens and his negro slave enters. Tituba is in her 40s. Paris brought her with him from Barbados, where he spent some years as a merchant before entering the ministry. She enters as one does who can no longer bear to be barred from the sight of her beloved, but she is also very frightened because her slave sense has warned her that, as always, trouble in this house eventually lands on her back. Tituba, already taken a step backwards. My Betty be hearty soon. Out of here. Tituba, backing to the door. My Betty not going to die. Paris, scrambling to his feet in a fury. Out of my sight. Okay, so what I want you to look at, Year 9, is I want you to look at mumbles. He mumbles. So when he's talking and he's supposed to be praying, he's a reverend. Reverend Paris, he mumbles. What do you think about that word? And then we've got the verb scrambling. Scrambling to his feet. Okay, so let's just have a look at those words. I want you to have a think. What does the verb mumbles suggest about his praying? I want you to remember that he's a reverend. He's a man of the church. He's a man of God, and he's mumbling. Okay, and then considering what we know about Tituba, you can always go back in the video and have a read of that information about Tituba if you need to. What does the verb scrambling suggest about Reverend Paris's reaction to Tituba, and what do we as an audience think of Reverend Paris? Okay, so I want you to write down mumbles, and I want you to write down scrambling, and I want you to do a little quote explosion if you can on mumbles. What it makes us think about is praying, and him scrambling as Tituba has come in the door and then is backing to the door, and what that makes us think about him. Pause the video and write down some ideas if you can now. Okay, so I've turned my ideas into a table. Now you don't have to draw this table, that's fine. You might have yours in a quote explosion, which is absolutely fine. So I've looked at the adjectives small and narrow. We've already said that the room is narrow and confined. So Paris might be a narrow-minded man. He might therefore be quite controlling because he wants everything to be tight and together. So if he's Betty's father, what sort of father might he be? He might be really strict and controlling, want to do everything his way. Don't worry if you've got different ideas, but you could jot your ideas onto mine as well. So you could combine my ideas and your ideas. Don't worry if you've got some different things, that's quite all right. Okay, what else have we got? Okay, so we looked at the adjective small, and we said that the furniture is quite small, it's not very comfortable, it's lacking luxury. So he could be quite a cold father. He could be very emotional, he's not very affectionate towards his daughter, he's quite a distant father. Okay. And then we've got the fact that the candle is still burning. So despite all that, an alternative interpretation, which is what gets you the higher grades in English, looking at one idea and then thinking, okay, but what else could it tell me? Could it tell me something different? If the candle still burns and he's been there a long time, he might still care for his daughter and is concerned about her, but he doesn't know how to show it, maybe. And he's evidently in prayer. So if he's not really praying, why? Maybe he's lost his faith. If he's a man of God and his daughter's really ill, maybe he's wondering why his daughter is ill. Why has God created this illness? Why has God made his daughter ill if he's such a faithful man? Okay, so you can pause the video at any point and you can add these ideas onto your quote explosions. Okay, and then on the second stage directions, we had the fact that Reverend Paris was mumbling when he was praying at the side of his daughter Betty. So if he's mumbling, it's not really properly speaking. So he might be struggling to speak, and therefore he's struggling to pray. It's not very good praying if you're a reverend. So he could be tired, could be unable to find the words. I've already said before, he might have lost his faith. So is he struggling to pray because he's lost his faith? Don't worry if you've got different ideas. These are just my ideas as well. Okay, and then the last one is stumbling. So if he stumbles, you've lost control. You're not walking very carefully. He's stumbling towards Betty though. He was stumbling in fury. So is he violent? Is he going out to hit her? Is he stumbling because he doesn't know what to do anymore? Now his daughter's so ill, he's lost control, hasn't he? Has he lost control with Betty, his daughter? Has he lost control with Tituba? Has he lost control because he just doesn't know what to do? We've said before at the start that he was a controlling father. And now his daughter is so ill and he can't do anything about it. Has he lost control now that he is stumbling and mumbling? Okay, so pause the video and just add to your quote explosions any of these ideas. Okay, so So all I want you to do is to turn those quote explosions into a short paragraph telling me what you've learned about the setting and Reverend Paris in the opening stage directions of the Crucible. And I've got some things on the screen that will help you do that. So we've got in the opening stage directions, we learn that the setting, or Paris, and choose which you're going to write about, is what's it like? Give me some ideas. Through Arthur Miller, that's the playwright, his use of adjectives or adverbs or verbs. What is the language choice that you've chosen? And then choose the technique that you're writing about. I've put adjective or adverb, but put verb, whatever it is that you've got. Use a quotation. It creates the impression of a what sort of room, what sort of man. This conveys the idea that the room is it narrow, is it confined, is it claustrophobic? Reverend Paris, is he strict, is he fierce, is he violent? And then, this is to get you some sort of higher levels. This is to show that you're exploring some alternative ideas. Maybe, perhaps, possibly, you're exploring some ideas. It's not, I definitely know the answer, because we can't know the answer. We don't know Reverend Paris yet. We're just at the beginning of the play. We're making some inference. We're trying to figure out what kind of man he is. And then we've got some connectives in addition, as well as this also. Okay, so pause the video, use your quote explosions and try and write a paragraph telling me what you can infer about the setting and about what it tells you about Reverend Paris, what kind of man you think he might be from those adjectives, the adverbs, the verbs, and using the ideas I've come up with and what you came up with yourself, and using these sentence stems and any of your own as well. Okay, and I'll show you an example and you can see what yours looks like compared to mine. All right, so just pause the video and write your own paragraph now. Okay, so how did we do year 9? This is my example. Don't worry if yours doesn't look exactly like mine, but I want you to have a look at what you've done, have a look at what I've done, and see if you've got any similar sort of things in your paragraph than you have to mine. And what you can do at the end is you can do a little bit of dit, and you can think, okay, I got that little bit right. I like that. Mine's a bit better than Mrs. I developed that idea more. You could have done. I'm not saying mine is perfect at all. So we've got in the opening stage directions, we learn that the room is not a cosy or pleasant room through Arthur Miller's use of adjectives. The adjectives, small and narrow, create the impression of a confined and limiting room which doesn't allow for a lot of space. It's not a place where a young teenager might usually grow up, or certainly want to grow up. This conveys the idea that Reverend Paris is a narrow-minded man who wants his daughter to do as he wishes. Okay, so if you just look at what I've got so far, I've got my language choice here, I've got my evidence from the text and my ideas. It's a confined and limited room. It doesn't allow for a lot of space. It's not somewhere where a teenager might usually grow up. Where am I developing my idea? He's a narrow-minded man. He wants his daughter to do as he wishes. Maybe, so I'm starting to bring in some tentative language, some possible alternative interpretation. Maybe he is a cruel man, doesn't allow his daughter any freedom, and he controls her life in every way. Okay, I do have some more on the next slide, but you can pause the video here if you want to just compare that to yours and think, have I got a maybe or a possibly or a perhaps in there? Have a thought of a development to my idea. Okay, we also learn that Reverend Paris is a troubled and impatient man. The verb mumbles might suggest he is struggling to pray. Perhaps, there we go, we've got another one. Perhaps he is not really praying for his daughter. Perhaps he's saying something else. His impatience and bad temper is also shown through the verb scrambling when Tituba enters. It is a possible sign of guilt that he doesn't want her there, or maybe he thinks she is guilty in some way for the state that his daughter is in. Okay, so have a look at your paragraph, Year 9. Don't worry if it's not as developed as mine or as long as mine, but you can always think, right, if I was going to do this again, what target would I set for myself to develop my paragraph? Would I try and use some maybes, some perhaps? Would I try and use an alternative interpretation? Try and think of another idea that it might suggest about Reverend Paris? Okay, would I make sure I've got some evidence, some technical language in there, like verb and scrambling? Okay, and just check what you could improve, and make sure you also, the most important bit is to make sure you look at what you have done well. What have you definitely got in your paragraphs that I have got in mine as well? All right. So well done. Well done for all your hard work today. That's excellent. Make sure you check Teams and make sure you check how your teacher wants your work uploaded, whether it's at the end of today's lesson or whether it's all together at the end of the week. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed today's learning and hope you look forward to reading more of the Crucible in tomorrow's lesson. Well done, Year 9. See you soon.